All right, guys, this is Frankenstein, the graphic novel, written by Mary Shelley. Now, for the reading today, we are reading pages 7 to 38. Here is a list of our characters. So, as you're reading, if you get confused by who somebody is, scroll back up to page 3 and 4. And I'm looking at these page numbers right here with the PDF down at the bottom. And again, this will give us a list of all of our characters and a little description of who they are. Now, the beginning of Frankenstein is written in Robert Walton's perspective. So these are letters written by Robert Walton to his sister Margaret. And remember, he is the captain of this ship. So we're going to go ahead and get started. From the letters of Robert Walton, Letter 1, December 11th. My dear sister, I am already far north of London. I feel a cold northern breeze play upon my cheeks, which braces my nerves and fills me with delight. This breeze, which has traveled from the regions towards which I am advancing, gives me a foretaste of those icy climes. I try in vain to be persuaded that the pole in this sea of frost and desolation, there, Margaret, the sun is forever visible. There we may be wafted to a land surpassing in wondering in wonders and in beauty every region hitherto discovered on the habitable globe. So he's going on a journey to the North Pole. This expedition has been the favorite dream of my early years. I have read with ardor the accounts of the various voyages made in the prospect of arriving at the North Pacific Ocean. Do I not deserve to accomplish some great purpose? My life might have been passed in ease and luxury, but I preferred glory to every enticement wealth placed in my path. I am about to proceed on a long and difficult voyage, the emergencies of which will demand all my fortitude. Letter 2, March 28th. How slowly the time passes here, encompassed as I am by frost and snow. I have no friend, Margaret. When I am glowing with the enthusiasm of success, there will be no one to participate in my joy. If I am assailed by disappointment, no one to sustain me in dejection. I cannot describe to you my sensations on the near prospect of my undertaking. So remember, he is the captain of this ship. He feels like he can't relate his excitement, his pains, his sorrows to anybody else on the ship because they work for him. He's the captain. They look to him to lead. Letter 3, July 7th. We have already reached a very high latitude. Be assured that I will not rashly encounter danger. Letter 4, August 5th. Last Monday, ice closed in the ship on all sides. Our situation was somewhat dangerous, as we were compassed round by a very thick fog. We accordingly lay to, hoping that some change would take place in the atmosphere and weather. This is a Gothic element right here. Pay attention to the weather scenes because that usually foreshadows something dramatic that's about to happen. About 2 o'clock the mist cleared away, and we beheld vast and irregular plains of ice, which seemed to have no end. Some of my comrades groaned, and my own mind began to grow watchful with anxious thoughts, when a strange sight suddenly attracted our attention and diverted our solicitude from our own situations. We perceived at the distance of half a mile a being which had the shape of a man, but apparently of gigantic stature. Shut in, however, by ice, it was impossible for us to follow his track. In the morning I found all the sailors busy on one side of the vessel, apparently talking to someone in the sea. It was in fact a sledge, which had drifted towards us in the night on a large fragment of ice. There was a human being whom the sailors were persuading to enter the vessel. He was not, as the other travelers seemed to be, a savage, but a European. So think about how odd this is, the fact that they are on a journey to the North Pole and they see not one but two men. The first man that they they saw was a very large man. They described him as a savage. Now, the next day in the morning, they see this other man who's described as a European, so basically saying he looked like an average man. So this is really odd to see not only one man, but two men out in the middle of nowhere. And now his men are trying to persuade this man that they found to get on board on their vessel. Here is our captain, and he will not allow you to perish on the open sea. Before I come on board, will you have the kindness to inform me whither you are bound? We are on a voyage of discovery towards the northern pole. Upon hearing this, he appeared satisfied and consented to come on board. His limbs were nearly frozen and his body dreadfully emaciated by fatigue and suffering. I never saw a man in so wretched a condition. We restored him to animation, and by slow degrees he recovered. 2 days passed before he was able to speak. Why did you come so far upon the ice in so strange a vehicle? To seek one who fled from me. I fancy we have seen him. We saw some dogs drawing a sledge with a man in it across the ice. The demon! Do you think the breaking up of the ice has destroyed the other sledge? The ice did not break until near midnight. He might have arrived at a place of safety before that time. I have doubtless excited your curiosity. You are too considerate to make inquiries, and yet you rescued me. You have restored me to life. A new spirit of life animated the stranger. He must have been a noble creature in his better days. August 13th. My affection for my guest increases every day. He excites at once my admiration and my pity to an astonishing degree. How can I see so noble a man destroyed by misery without feeling the most poignant grief? He is now much recovered from his illness. August 19th. Yesterday, the stranger said to me, "You may easily perceive, Captain Moulton, that I have suffered great misfortunes. You seek for knowledge as I once did, and I hope that may not be a serpent to sting you as mine has been. Yet you may deduce an apt moral from my tale. Prepare to hear of occurrences which are usually deemed marvelous. My fate is nearly fulfilled, nothing can alter my destiny. Listen to my history, and you will perceive how irrevocably it is determined." So now this gentleman is going to tell us his side of the story. So chapter one, volume one, is from a new perspective. So make sure you notice that the story transitions and we have a new character telling the story now. Also, notice this warning that this character is giving Captain Walton. You are on this journey to be the first one to discover the North Pole. I took a similar journey. I wanted to discover something new, but pay attention to how this discovery turned tragic and how you should listen to my story and learn the lessons that I learned so you don't fall into the same tragedy that I did. Volume 1, Chapter 1. I, Victor Frankenstein, am by birth a Genevese, and my family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. My father filled several public situations with honor and reputation. There was a considerable difference between the ages of my parents, but this circumstance seemed to unite them only closer in bonds of devoted affection. After their marriage, my parents sought the pleasant climate of Italy. From Italy, they visited Germany and Naples. I was born at Naples, and as an infant, accompanied them on their rambles. So this man that Robert Walton found out in the middle of nowhere in the North Pole turns out to be Victor Frankenstein. I remained for several years their only child. I was their only plaything and their idol, and something better, their child, the innocent and helpless creature bestowed on them by heaven. When I was about 5 years old, my mother found a peasant and his wife, with 5 hungry babes. Among them there was one which attracted my mother far above all the rest. She was the orphan daughter of a nobleman, and with my father's permission my mother prevailed on her rustic guardians to yield their charge to her. Elizabeth Lavenza became the inmate of my parents' household, my more than sister, the beautiful and adopted, the beautiful and adored companion of all my occupations and my pleasures. So the Frankensteins went in and they found this poor child. Their family was suffering, and they decide to adopt Elizabeth Lavenza. Turns out Frankenstein is very much in love with Elizabeth Lavenza. Volume 1, Chapter 2. We were brought up together. There was not quite a year difference in our ages. On the birth of a second son, my parents gave up entirely their wandering life and fixed themselves in their native country. We possessed a house in Geneva. There, I united myself in the bonds of the closest friendship to Henry Clerval. He was deeply read in books of chivalry and romance. He began to write many a tale. The busy stage of life, the virtues of heroes, and the actions of men were his theme. Elizabeth was the living spirit of love to soften and attract. Clerval might not have been so full of kindness and tenderness had she not unfolded to him the real loveliness of benefit. Natural philosophy is the genius that has regulated my fate. I procured the whole works of Agrippa, Paracelsus, and Albertus Magnus. I read and studied the wild fancies of these writers with delight. Here were men who had penetrated the secrets of nature. I became their disciple. Wealth was an inferior object, but what glory would attend the discovery if I could banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to any but a violent death. When I was 15, we witnessed a most violent and terrible thunderstorm. It advanced from behind the mountains of Jura, another weather scene. The thunder burst at once with frightful loudness from various quarters of the heavens. I beheld a stream of fire issue from an old and beautiful oak. And as soon as the dazzling light vanished, the oak had disappeared, and nothing remained but a blasted stump. The next morning we found the tree shattered in a singular manner. It was not splintered by the shock, but entirely reduced to thin ribbons of wood. Before this I was not unacquainted with the more obvious laws of electricity. I at once gave up my former occupations, talking about his former studies. I betook myself to the mathematics and the branches of study appertaining to that science, but it was ineffectual. Destiny was too potent, and her immutable laws had decreed my utter and terrible destruction. So notice he has a lot of warnings that he's giving. Volume 1, Chapter 3. When I was 17, my parents resolved that I should become a student at the University of Ingolstadt. Then misfortune occurred. Elizabeth caught the scarlet fever. My mother attended her sick bed. Elizabeth was saved, but my mother sickened. My children, my firmest hopes of future happiness, were placed on the prospect of your union. Elizabeth, my love, you must supply my place to my younger children. Alice, I regret that I am taken from you. I will endeavor to resign myself cheerfully to death, and will indulge a hope of meeting you in another world. She died calmly, and her countenance expressed affection even in death. My mother was dead, but we had still duties which we ought to perform. Elizabeth veiled her grief and strove to act the comforter to us all. The day of my departure for Ingolstadt at length arrived. Clerval had endeavored to persuade his father to permit him to join me, but in vain. Write often, Victor. I loved my brothers, Elizabeth and Clerval, but I ardently desired the acquisition of knowledge. My journey to Ingolstadt was long and fatiguing. At length the high white steeple of the town met my eyes. The next morning I delivered my letters of introduction. Chance, or rather the angel of destruction, led me first to Monsieur Crimp, professor of natural philosophy. He was an uncouth man, but deeply imbued in the secrets of his science. Have you really spent your time studying such nonsense? Every minute, every instant that you have wasted on those books is utterly and entirely lost. I little expected in this enlightened and scientific age to find a disciple of Magnus and Paracelsus. My dear sir, you must begin your studies entirely anew. I went into the lecturing hall of Monsieur Waldman. This professor was very unlike his colleague. The ancient teachers of this silent science promised possibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promise very little. They know that the elixir of life is a chimera. But these philosophers penetrate into the recesses of nature and have discovered how the blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe. They have acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They can command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquake, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows. Soon my mind was filled with one thought, one conception, one purpose. I will pioneer a new way, explore unknown powers, and unfold to the world the deepest mysteries of creation. Volume 1, Chapter 4. 2 years passed in which I made some discoveries which procured me great esteem at the university. In Monsieur Waldman, I found a true friend. In a thousand ways he smoothed for me the path of knowledge. One of the phenomena which had particularly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and indeed any animal endued with life. Whence did the principle of life proceed? So he's trying to discover how to create a life, how to create a being. To examine the causes of life, we must first have recourse to death. I became acquainted with anatomy. But I must also observe the natural decay and corruption of the human body. Darkness had no effect upon my fancy, and a churchyard was to me merely the receptacle of bodies deprived of life, which from being the seat of beauty and strength had become food for the worm. I spent days and nights in vaults and charnel houses. I saw how the fine form of man was degraded and wasted. I paused, examining and analyzing all the minute of causation, until from the midst of darkness a sudden light broke in upon me. After weeks of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. So he's found the cause of life and death. When I found so astonishing a power placed within my hands, I hesitated a long time concerning the manner in which I should employ it. Although I possessed the capacity of bestowing animation, yet to prepare a frame for the reception of it with all its intricacies of fibers, muscles, and veins, still remained a work of inconceivable difficulty and labor. As the minuteness of the parts formed a great hindrance to my speed, I resolved to make the being of gigantic stature, above 8 feet in height, and proportionately large. I seemed to have lost all soul or sensation but for this one pursuit. So he's telling us again that it is very difficult to create these muscles and veins. And so he made this being larger than normal so that it was easier for him to create this life. In a solitary chamber, or rather cell, I kept my workshop of filthy creation, and often did my human nature turn with loathing from my occupation. I was thus engaged heart and soul in one pursuit. Every night I was oppressed by a slow fever, and I became nervous to a most painful degree. The fall of a leaf startled me, and I shunned my fellow creatures, as if I had been guilty of a crime. So he's shutting himself in his lab. He's not communicating with anyone, not any of his friends or companions. He is just solely focused on this creation, and he's really starting to hate himself. He's becoming oppressed, depressed, and very just low and dark feeling. Volume 1, Chapter 5. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. I collected the instruments of life around me that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing. So this goes back to when he was 15 and he witnessed that thunderstorm, the electricity striking the tree. Now he is using galvanism or electricity to animate this body that he has created. His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God! I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. I had worked hard for 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room. I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept, indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave, worms crawling in the folds of flannel. I started from my sleep with horror. I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped, and took refuge in the courtyard, where I remained during the rest of the night, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. Oh, no, no mortal could support the horror of that countenance. I had gazed on him while unfinished. He was ugly then, but when those muscles and joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing as even Dante could not have conceived. Dreams that had been so Dreams that had been my food and pleasant rest for so long a space were now become a hell to me. So he's making an allusion to a popular literature book, Dante's Inferno, about the different layers of hell. So again, he's comparing this monster to the devil and to demons. Morning, dismal and wet, at length dawned. I sought to avoid the wretch whom I feared every turning of the street would present to my view. I did not dare return to the apartment which I inhabited. I traversed the streets without any clear conception of where I was or what I was doing. My heart palpitated in the sickness of fear. My dear Frankenstein, how glad I am to see you! How fortunate that you should be here at the very moment of my alighting! I grasped his hand and in a moment forgot my horror and misfortune. Henry Clerval! You may easily believe how great was the difficulty to persuade my father that all necessary knowledge was not comprised in the noble art of bookkeeping. But his affection for me at length overcame his dislike of learning, and he has permitted me to undertake a voyage of discovery to the land of knowledge. It gives me the greatest delight to see you. But tell me how you left my father, brothers, and Elizabeth. Very well, and very happy, only a little uneasy that they hear from you so seldom. By the by, I did not before remark how ill you appear, so thin and pale, and look as if you had been watching for several nights. You have guessed right. I have lately been so deeply engaged in one occupation that I have not allowed myself sufficient rest. but I sincerely hope that all these employments are now at an end and that I am at length free. I trembled excessively. I walked with a quick pace, and we soon arrived at my college. I then reflected, and the thought made me shiver, that the creature might still be there in my apartment. I dreaded to behold this monster, but I feared still more that Henry should see him. Henry, remain a few minutes. A cold shivering came over me, but I became assured that my enemy had indeed fled. I clapped my hands for joy and ran down for Clerval. So look at how he's describing this being that he created. Again, he's a monster, he's his enemy. The servant brought us breakfast, but I was unable to contain myself. Ha 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 ha. My dear Victor, what, for God's sake, is the matter? How ill you are. What is this cause? What is the cause of all of this? I thought I saw the dreaded spectre glide into the room. Do not ask me. He can tell me. Save me! Oh, save me! I fell down in a fit. Poor Clerval, what must have been his feelings, a meeting which he anticipated with such joy and so strangely turned to bitterness. I did not recover my senses for a long, long time. This was the commencement of a nervous fever, which confined me for several months. During all that time Henry was my only nurse. Knowing my father's advanced age and how wretched my sickness would make Elizabeth, he spared them this grief by concealing the extent of my disorder. By very slow degrees and with frequent relapses that alarmed and grieved my friend, I recovered. It was the divine spring, and the season contributed greatly to my convalescence. Dearest Clerval, how kind, how very good you are to me. This whole winter, instead of being spent in study, has been consumed in my sick room. How shall I ever repay you? You will repay me entirely if you get well as fast as you can, and since you appear in such good spirits, your father and Elizabeth would be very happy if they received a letter from you. They hardly know how ill you have been and are uneasy at your long silence. How could you suppose that my first thought would not fly towards those dear, dear friends? Then you will be glad to see this letter that has been lying here for some days for you. It is from your cousin, I believe. So again, Elizabeth Lavenza is his adopted sister slash his lover. Sometimes in old literature, they describe any family member as cousins. So he's actually referring to Elizabeth. Volume 1, Chapter 6. My dearest cousin, you have been ill, very ill, and even the constant letters of dear kind Henry are not sufficient to reassure me on your account. Get well and return to us. You will find a happy, cheerful home and friends who love you dearly. Your father's health is vigorous, and he asks but to see you. But be assured that you are well. How pleased you would be to remark the improvement of our Ernest. He is now 16 and desirous to enter into foreign service, but we cannot part with him until his elder brother returns to us. So this is Ernest, Victor Frankenstein's brother, and then this is William, his brother also. I wish you could see little darling William. He is very tall of his age, with sweet laughing eyes when he smiles. Two little dimples appear on each cheek. He has already had one or two little wives, but Louisa Byron is his favorite, a pretty girl of 5 years of age. Do you remember on what occasions Justine Morowitz entered our family? Her mother was a widow with 4 children, of whom Justine was the third. Through a strange perversity, her mother could not endure her, and treated her ill. When Justine was 12 years of age, she came to live at our house. Justine is the maid or servant for the Frankensteins. Justine, you may remember, was a great favorite of yours. You once remarked that if you were in an ill humor, one glance from Justine could dissipate it. One by one, her brothers and sisters died, and Justine was called home by her repentant mother. She sometimes begged Justine to forgive her unkindness, but much oftener accused her of having caused the deaths of her brothers and sisters. But Madame Moritz is now at peace forever. She died on the first approach of cold weather at the beginning of this last winter. So Justine's mother passed away. Justine has returned to us, and I assure you I love her tenderly. She is very clever and gentle and extremely pretty. I have written myself into better spirits, dear cousin, but my anxiety returns upon me as I conclude. Adieu, and I entreat you, write, Elizabeth Lavenza. Dear, dear Elizabeth, I will write instantly and relieve them from the anxiety they must feel. I wrote, and this exertion greatly fatigued me, but my convalescence had commenced and proceeded regularly. In another fortnight I was able to leave my chamber. Ever since the fatal night, the end of my labors, I had conceived a violent antipathy, even to the name of natural philosophy. I could never persuade myself to confine to Clerval that event which was so often present to my recollection. So he's saying that now that he has created this life and this monster, he now no longer wants to study um, the classes or the um, areas of study that he was interested in. He's no longer interested in that anymore. Clerval came to the university with the design of making himself master of the Oriental languages, as thus he should open a field for the plan of life he had marked out for himself. I was easily induced to enter on the same studies. I found not only instruction, but consolation in the works of the Orientalists. Their melancholy is soothing, and their joy elevating to a degree I never experienced in studying the authors of any other country. When you read their writings, life appears to consist in a warm sun and a garden of roses, and the smiles and frowns of a fair enemy, and the fire that consumes your own heart. Summer passed. My return to Geneva was delayed by several accidents. Winter and snow arrived, the roads were deemed impassable, and my journey was retarded until the ensuing spring. I felt this delay bitterly. Henry proposed a pedestrian farewell tour in the environs of Ingolstadt, that I might bid a personal farewell to the country I had so long inhabited. Excellent friend. We passed a fortnight in these perambulations. My health and spirits had long been restored, but Clerval called forth the better feelings of my heart. He again taught me to love the aspect of nature and the cheerful faces of children. I became the same happy creature a few years ago, loved and beloved by all, had no sorrow or care. My own spirits were high, and I bounded along with feelings of unbridged joy and hilarity. All right, and that's the end of part one.